Our next speaker is Dawson Byrd, presenting Transfer Learning for Automating Science Journalism.
So thank you for the introduction. First, I'm going to start with a brief overview of our contributions. So we've developed a method to extract the relevant points in a scientific perspective from the scientific debate about whether or not the paper is relevant to human language. So I'm getting a lot of weird looks from the audience, and that's because I lied. This is actually the output of the model that we trained on my RSI paper. And so let's get to our actual contribution. So first, we approach text summarization on the novel or unique task domain of generation. Second, we develop a novel evaluation method to evaluate our summaries. And third, we improve the coverage of our models through applying transfer learning. So let's get into our actual task. Our task is automating science journalism. And what is science journalism? Many of you know that if you read articles like from Science Daily or Scientific American, the main purpose of science journalism is that they can take scientific research and findings and present it in a way that is understandable to a lay audience. And so our goal is to generate some sort of model that can take in a scientific paper and generate a press release. And so as you can predict, this has a variety of practical applications. Many of us at RSI, for example, are faced with a very challenging task of presenting to you all. And so say we had this model, this can make our lives a lot easier. So inspired by the way we humans learn to process and understand information, we seek a data-driven approach. So namely, we train on a data set of around 50,000 pairs of scientific papers and their corresponding press releases, and we use this to update the model. So a source scientific paper will be fed into our model, and then our model will be updated with the goal of maximizing the probability of the real press releases. So this is our machine learning framework. And furthermore, we have one motivation for this capturing of scientific knowledge is inspired by a recent work published in Nature where unsupervised word embeddings were able to learn significant scientific concepts through training on material science literature. Namely, embeddings for periodic table elements were able to identify properties and relations between different elements. And so this inspires the following pipeline. So not only will our model try to extract relevant information, but ideally our model will embed a certain amount of knowledge about scientific concepts and the way things work in order to integrate that knowledge into generating our press release. And you can see here that there's an overlap between the information in a press release and in the scientific paper that's colored purple. So what are our model requirements? First, we want to ensure that our model has sufficient coverage. So that means that it covers all the main and important points within a scientific paper. Second, we care about accuracy. And basically what this is that whether or not the information is correct or false. And third, we care about style. And this is what is most important, as if our model extracts the right information but doesn't present it in an understandable way, it won't be useful. So luckily, many of the sequence-to-sequence tasks follow a similar architecture to our pipeline. So essentially, you feed an input into an encoder model. That encoder generates an embedding. That embedding is fed into a decoder. And then finally, our output is created. So in our case, we use convolutional sequence-to-sequence models. And I'm not going to go into the details of this, but essentially how it works is it performs convolutions over the input sequence that can extract information from local windows. And what this does is it gives the model an understanding of what the information is in each window of the text, and then through the multiple layers can build a hierarchical representation of what the text is saying. So we also investigate the usage of what is called a self-attention mechanism. So this works by modeling relationships between every single pair of words instead of just within a local window. And so there are two main advantages to this. First, it allows the model to embed long-range context into its generations, and it also allows the model to understand linguistic and grammatical or conceptual relationships between words. So this is our main contribution, transfer learning. So in a nutshell, transfer learning on a task A is choosing a similar task B, co-training on that with the hopes that performance on A will improve. And so in our case, we improve coverage of our models by co-training on the task of abstract generation. So namely, we combine a data set consisting of scientific papers from arXiv and their corresponding abstracts into our press release data set. And if we look back at our pipeline diagram, we see that the information contained in an abstract in green is mainly contained also within the scientific paper. And so we reason that if we co-train on abstract generation, the model will learn to focus on this information rather than being distracted by the other information that's in a press release. So how do we evaluate our models? As many of you can guess, this is a very difficult task, as we don't actually know quantitatively what makes a good summary and what doesn't. So in the past, for most summarization tasks, authors and researchers have used Rouge scores. And basically what these measure is word overlap and phrase overlap. So these are good for extractive summaries, but in our case, since we're heavily paraphrasing and generating metaphors and different ways of representing information, root scores are not sufficient. And so in this case, we propose a novel evaluation method called rank. And so I'm going to use the board for this. So essentially, our models can be described as a probability distribution p hat that gives a probability of a certain press release given a source S. And so the goal of our model is to make this equal to the ground truth probability p. So this is what it is in reality. And we can make certain assumptions about p. Namely, if we have a target press release T and a source S, then P of T given S should be greater than P of T given some other source S prime. And so the goal of our model evaluation is to ensure that this condition is true. But we had one more difference. Instead of taking the full source S, we take a 100-word subsequence of S to make sure that the model is only considering meaning rather than learning from different structural trends in the source. And so our final score will be the percentage. So if we take 10 random samples, it'll be the percentage where, if for each item we choose 9 other false sources, it'll be the percentage of times where this is true for all the other false sources S prime. So what are our results? So first we look at the scores. So this is on our original data set without transfer learning. And we find that first our baseline convolutional model performs better on both scores than adding self-attention. But the most important thing is that when we add our combined data set, which implements this transfer learning idea, both rank and rouge scores significantly increase. And so this isn't really complete without analyzing the subjective quality of these summarizations. So let's go into sample generation. So here's an article from the source. We don't have to read the whole thing, but from what I gather, it's on the similarities between archaea and eukaryotic cells. And so this is the generation from transfer learning on our self-attention model. And so in green is correct information, red is incorrect information, and purple is information that could be correct, but is not in the source. And so as you can see, the model learns tons of correct phrases and conceptual ideas. However, there is some issues with accuracy and repetition. One thing that I do want to point out, though, is that the model gets this concept called X-ray crystallography. And so I'm not a bio person, but I think what this is that it's a method of visualizing DNA. And this method actually wasn't mentioned at all in the source, which is very interesting because that's all the model sees. However, this method was used by the authors of that source. And so the fact that this is within our sample generation kind of shows that our model is actually able to utilize information such as the authors of these papers having this in one of their previous works in generating their summary. So general observations, we find that our baseline model is good at extracting information. However, it struggles with presentation. On the opposite end of the spectrum, implementing self-attention structures summaries and integrates good grammatical knowledge. However, it fails to accurately represent the data when trained on our original data set. But what we find finally is that when we combine self-attention and our transfer learning paradigm, it's both able to integrate model knowledge and linguistic coherence, and also improve coverage of the summaries by keeping focus. So conclusions and future work. So we see that transfer learning with an abstract domain significantly improves the coverage of our models. And so this suggests that transfer learning can be applied in a variety of domains. For example, without even changing the model, we can improve model performance on any property by simply choosing a task that specializes on that property instead. And so we also learned something about self-attention. So for larger data sets, based off of the examples that we've seen, integrating self-attention could allow the model to learn useful knowledge that can be applied in generating press releases. So I would like to acknowledge the following people. First, my mentor, Rumen Dangovski, for being incredibly helpful throughout this whole process. Michelle Shen, an undergrad in our group, for her contributions to the project. Dr. Marin Soljic, our PI. My tutor, Nathan Siegel. And then finally, RSI, CE, and MIT for making this possible. Thank you.
We will now take questions from the judges.
So,
No.
So you're introducing a new scoring technique, and you're applying it also to, like, what validation did you do to the rank technique outside your stuff? Like, did you retroactively apply it to other people's
Yeah, so
or real people, or?
So we weren't able to apply rank outside of our task domain. However, we were able to observe how it correlated with Rouge scores. And so we did find that in many instances, rank correlated with the Rouge score, which basically suggests that it's also measuring how well the model extracts information. And so this is a good thing. However, it's still not complete, as we don't just want our model to extract information. We want it to present it in a logical way. And so, yeah, rank is good. However, it's not complete, as it doesn't capture the full range of our requirements. Yeah.
Could you go back to rank, how you define rank?
Oh, yeah.
Do the judges want to ask a question?
Okay.
I guess my question is, why did you, what were you trying to capture in rank? I know you sort of addressed this earlier, but if you could elaborate a little bit.
Yeah, so I guess this is a good question. What we're trying to capture through the rank metric is making sure that the model has the target generation has a unique link to the source. So if this wasn't greater than this for another source, that means that there isn't really a unique link between this target and the source, right? Because when the model is maximizing this probability, it's looking at two things: how well this corresponds to the source, but also how likely this press release is in general. And that can consider different attributes of the press release, structural things and wording, right? And so by testing to see if this is true, we're trying to make sure that it's not just looking at the characteristics of the press release, but whether or not it has a unique link to our source, which is what we want.
So if I can paraphrase what you're saying is, you train a bunch of biology papers. You don't want, supported by the National Institutes of Health, to just automatically be in every press release, no matter what the paper said.
Yeah.
We will now also take questions from the audience.
Did you ever consider using taking an evaluation score, something like, using a word to vec type of sentence in Dangovski, and then taking the cosine similarity between the full source and your generated summary, and using that as part of your score?
Yeah, so we didn't actually consider that, but that is a good idea. However, one of the limitations of that, though, is that even if the model does have a high cosine similarity to the reference summary, it still doesn't really capture style, right? And so, sure, it could help in making sure that it has the same semantic information, but it's still not a complete metric in the sense that it doesn't capture how well the summary is written and other properties.
So I was wondering if using abstracts in the training process made the end results more scientific and technical in their style than a traditional scientific journal article.
So we didn't see anything with making the generated summaries more technical. However, we did see that it contained more of the correct information. So, for example, without training on abstracts, we saw that a lot of our self-attention models would find one thing about the article, for example, DNA, but then go talking about something completely different. So in this example, our self-attention model, without training on abstracts, it found that DNA was part of this. However, it started to proceed on something about DNA damage, which has nothing to do with the source article. And so once we integrate training on abstracts, we found that it stuck to the main subject of the source, didn't get too technical, but it just kept to the correct subject matter.
Could you go back to the rank definition, please? I'm also slightly confused. So, from what I gather, which is probably wrong, you create a press release, and then you decide. So you create a ideal press release in the model, and then the model checks if that press release is best aligned to the source that it was given to.
So actually, we're not using this is the generated press release, here's the actual reference summary. And so we're testing the probability of this target summary that's already given to us. So this is what the target is in our data set. And so we're testing to see if the model assigns a high probability to this value, not the generated summary.
Okay.
Yeah.
And we're out of time. All right, thank you, Dawson.